Depression and self care. Most people think they understand the connection, but brain science reveals something shocking. When we're depressed, our neural pathways actually rewire themselves to make basic self care feel impossible. Today, we're exploring how tiny actions can hack this system and rebuild mental health from the ground up.
You know what fascinates me about this? The way depression literally changes our brain's operating system. It's not just feeling sad, it's a complete rewiring of how we process self worth.
Exactly right. And here's what's really interesting. Studies show that during major depressive episodes, the brain's reward center actually shrinks by up to 7%. That means even basic tasks like showering or eating become neurologically harder to initiate because you literally don't have the happiness bandwidth for making any effort, let alone effort towards your own self care.
So it's not just people being lazy or unmotivated, their brains are physically working against them.
That's right. Think of it like your computer's operating system getting corrupted. No matter how many times someone tells you to just try harder or snap out of it, you're dealing with actual neural pathways that need to be rebuilt instead.
Well, that certainly puts things in a different perspective. How do we even begin to address something that's so deeply wired into our biology?
Here's where it gets fascinating. Research shows we can actually hack this system through something called behavioral activation. Instead of waiting to feel better first, we can use tiny actions to rewire our neural pathways.
Hmm, that sounds counterintuitive. You're saying the action comes before the feeling?
That's the hack. And here's the science behind it. Every time you perform an act of self care, you are telling your brain that you are worthy and you have value. By increasing your feeling of being worthy, your brain is readjusting your self esteem. This releases small amounts of dopamine and serotonin, even if it's just washing your hands or drinking a glass of water while saying, I am worth it out loud. You're creating new neural pathways that help you claw yourself out of something as intense as depression.
That's really interesting. So you're essentially reprogramming your brain through behavior rather than trying to think your way out of depression?
Right. And studies show this approach can be so much more effective than cognitive therapy alone. Rumination is one of the symptoms of depression. So, thinking over and over about your problem alone is not enough to help you feel better. Instead, what you need is new information for your brain to synthesize. It's like laying down new train tracks in your brain. At first, it might not look like much, but you're building infrastructure for lasting change.
Could you break down some specific examples of how someone might start this process?
So here's where we get really practical. Instead of trying to take a full shower, maybe just wash your face. Instead of cooking a meal, eat a handful of nuts. The key is to make the action so small that your brain's resistance system doesn't kick in.
And I imagine timing plays a role in this too?
Absolutely. This is where something called habit stacking comes in. Research shows we're 70% more likely to maintain a new habit if we attach it to an existing one. So before you check your phone in the morning, take 3 deep breaths. Before you sit on the couch, do one stretch.
You know what's really striking about this approach? How it acknowledges the reality of depression while still offering practical solutions.
And here's what's really powerful. Studies show that people who implement these micro actions see a 25% improvement in their depression symptoms within just 2 weeks. It's not about massive transformations, it's about consistent, tiny steps.
But what about when people inevitably miss a day or fall off track?
This is a crucial point you're making. I actually have another podcast episode that speaks about failing forward. Essentially, the goal is to view setbacks as information and feedback rather than failures. Think of it like a science experiment. Every failure is just information about what works and what doesn't.
That's such a different way of looking at it. How long does it typically take to see real changes?
Well, neuroscience shows that new neural pathways start forming within 24 hours of consistent action. But here's the key. It takes about 66 days, not the commonly cited 21, for these pathways to become stable habits. That's why we focus on sustainability over speed.
So it's really about playing the long game, isn't it?
Exactly. And here's what's fascinating. Studies of neuroplasticity show that even tiny actions repeated consistently can lead to significant brain changes within 3 months. It's like compound interest for your mental health.
This has been such an enlightening discussion about the science behind mental health recovery.
And that's what I hope people take away from this. Recovery isn't about willpower or motivation, it's about understanding how your brain works and using that knowledge to create lasting change, one small step at a time. Because every tiny action is literally rewiring your brain for better mental health.